So I'm using free software to make these videos for you guys for class, and this software will rudely cut me off if I have rambled on longer than 15 minutes. It will just stop recording at 15 minutes. So that is why your last video ended up while I was raving about this photo. All right, so um, let's get back on track. Um, New York, Central Park, just so that you guys can kind of look at this and see the scale of what Olmsted may have been talking about, this idea of ventilating a city, of providing park space. There it is, Central Park, pretty cool. Okay, so another concern of planners was civic improvement. What civic improvement meant is this is activities like planting trees, paving streets, having these anti-billboard campaigns, so your like streets aren't just littered up with billboards. The idea of putting in drinking fountains, public drinking fountains, putting in public restrooms, making sure that there are parks, there are recreation facilities for the public to use. So that's kind of the activities of civic improvement. So there was the municipal art movement, and it was this fusion of art and architecture and planning, and it was really based on this idea that cities should be beautiful and not just functional. I mean, this is America. We had the Roaring Twenties. We're prosperous, right? We're growing. We're becoming a world power. City is this ideology that cities can be more than just here's where you work, here's where you live, that we could do something more, that we can really be beautiful, that we can instill these things that kind of evoke civic pride. So the result of this municipal art movement were things like archways, fountains, statues, these different kind of works of urban design and art. And you can see these in any city, in every city. You'll see these fountains and statues, and it was this created with this municipal art movement. So another big thing to remember is the City Beautiful movement. This was a movement that really sought to remake an entire section of the city rather than just one point. And what that means is if a statue is just one point in a city, the City Beautiful movement focused on a bigger area. Let's like remake a whole section. It focused on streets and art and public buildings, kind of incorporating all that. And a good example of that would be the National Mall in Washington, D.C. If you guys have ever been there, that came out of the City Beautiful movement. Okay, so let's talk about the Plan of Chicago. This is really like the birth of modern city planning. Plan of Chicago, very important, presented by Daniel Burnham, 1909 or 1906. I mean, it took him like a few years to make the plan, so my year there might not be exactly right because it took several years to kind of make this plan and development and implement it, but it gives you an idea of when this was taking place. So the Plan of Chicago. It involved a system of highways. You had this integrated kind of public transportation system as well as the highways and the streets for automobiles. There was a plan for street widening. See how this is like a citywide thing to widen streets? You had this whole system of parks and wildlife preserves. And one thing that Burnham and the plan's sponsors did is they had the political foresight to gather public support for their plan. They didn't just make this beautiful document and then let it sit on a shelf. They were like, involved in the politics. They made copies of the plan and made sure that that was available to the public. They passed it out to the public. They got the plan kind of included as a chapter in a textbook that children in Chicago used in the public schools. So it was this idea of taking their plan and really making it accessible to the public so that they could get public support. So they understood ahead of time the importance of that piece. So what the city did, I mean, this was like this really big ambitious plan. So they created a planning commission to carry out the plan. At first, they picked like one project. If this plan had a whole bunch of projects, you're like, okay, we're going to pick one project and see if you can do it. And they did, and they built it, and it was successful. So they're like, okay, well, let's do this whole plan. Here's a planning commission. And so then by 1931, they had done 300 million in bond issues to finance various elements of the project. The project had several different elements. So that's kind of how that was. So if you're an urban studies major, here at Dillard, go explore this plan of Chicago, remember it, know about it. Asking about the plan of Chicago and why it was important is something that can possibly show up on like your comprehensive exam when it comes to be your senior year. So remember that. So what did we learn from the plan of Chicago? Well, first it told us what a plan should look like. It was the blueprint for here's what a plan is. So, and it's some of the characteristics of the plan should be comprehensive. It should cover, comprehensive means it should cover a variety of issues. It should be on a citywide scale. It's not like one issue like sanitation. It's a comprehensive for a variety of issues, a variety of uses of the city, and that it should span a relatively long period of time. I would say that today master plans, comprehensive plans are like 10 years would be like a short time period to carry out a plan. So that's what I mean by relatively long period of time. This isn't something that like we're going to do in 1 year. It's a kind of more of a long-term planning process. The Chicago plan is that it should largely involve public financing and public land, and that support from citizens is essential. This is one thing we learned from the plan of Chicago, how they garnered the public support for the plan, because if you don't have public support, if you don't have the citizen support, then your plan, it's not going to happen. So what was missing? The plan of Chicago was phenomenal. I mean, for what we had at the time, it was amazing. But there, a good chunk of, a few things that was missing, that it didn't address, that plans should address today if we're making them. One thing is that they weren't really concerned with social issues. This idea of people, of race, of class, of these kind of social justice issues. It was mostly this plan. It emphasized land and structures, kind of the physical buildings, the physical redevelopment of land is where it was focused. It didn't talk about the need to update or revise the plan. It was just kind of like, here's the plan. But this is something that we know today is that if you've got a plan, they always need revisions. They always need to be updated. They've got to kind of change with the times. And the plan of Chicago, it didn't consider that the public should be involved in making the plan. Because what they did, it was like this panel of experts prepared this final document, and they're like, here you go. And they just gave the plan to the public for them to look at and review and get support for. So the idea that the public should be involved in actually the process of making it, they didn't consider that. And that's a big deal today. Definitely a big deal in New Orleans. We can talk about that more in class if you want to. And the plan of Chicago, it only pertained to public-owned land, not private land. Is only the public land. So why is that? Because at the time, public control of private land was a really difficult thing. When we talked about the colonial towns and how you could kind of do whatever you want to, and then that really shifted. Well, the public could only do things with public land. They didn't really have any control over private land. So what happened is a series of laws and court cases began to establish the right of local government to control the use of land it did not own. And we'll talk more about this later in the semester, but zoning is really the mechanism for doing that. So by 1920, the capacity of government to zone for different land uses had been established. So typically communities, they're divided into zones. You've got a zoning map. We'll look at New Orleans zoning map later this semester. And it shows like what you can do with that land, the permitted uses, the density of it, the design, the look, the feel, the goals for each zone. They're specified in that comprehensive zoning ordinance. So at the time, the power to do zoning, it really looked like a good way to do something like protect a neighborhood of single-family homes from land developers and land speculators just coming in and putting in a gas station or a used car lot or a hamburger joint or something that like you didn't want in your neighborhood. That the commercial, the speculators would do if they could do whatever they wanted to with their private land. So this is a way for the public control, for the government to have some say in development. So city planning, You know, I said with the plan of Chicago, Chicago established this planning commission. Well, lots of cities started doing it. Lots of cities started making planning commissions, and they would develop their community plans, and the plans had zoning, and they talked about transit and streets, and these community plans all talked about public recreation and civic art. So these ideas, these art movements, the city beautiful kind of thing, the concerns we went through the last video, concerns of urban planners, these things all started showing up in community plans and what they had in them. So kind of the goals of these plans was to an orderly pattern of land use. You wanted to avoid incompatible land uses. Incompatible means you don't want like your big noisy stinky smelly factory right next to your beautiful house. That's what incompatible land uses mean. Adequate parks and recreation, this open space, these parks, addressing transportation so that it's both public transportation and private transportation. And then there was also, you know, this idea of protecting the business community. So this idea of making the community attractive for businesses was also a big goal of the plans. So just kind of a recap of what was missing from the early plans is they didn't talk about housing. Housing's still an issue. They didn't really talk about public capital investments. We can talk more about that in class, just remind me. Citizen participation wasn't considered, and then the idea that the plan needed to be revised, that wasn't considered in these early plans, and these are all things that we would talk about now when we start making plans today. Let's skip over Radburn for right now. Okay, so of everything we've said before is talking about city plans, this is regional and state planning. So regional means the footprint's bigger, right? So like think of New York, the New York metro area. We've got New York State, you have Fairfield County, Connecticut, you got parts of New Jersey. Like you need to have a regional plan for all these. Like what if your subway just stopped at the New York, New Jersey line? No, that's not going to work, right? You needed to have a regional plan for this. So so that's kind of like with New York is that area is where this idea of regional planning started. So out in LA, Los Angeles County, this was the first county-wide zoning plan as opposed to just a city zoning. They have a zoning kind of map zoning plan on a county-wide level. There's a lot of questions when you start doing this because like these bigger footprints, you're crossing political lines. So it's like, where is the political power to carry out regional plans? Whose responsibility is it? Who has the power to do it? A difficult question to answer, but one answer is they started creating public authorities. Really, the most famous one really is like the Port Authority of New York. So what this is a public authority that has the political designation, the political power to be able to carry out regional plans. That's kind of cool. So the bigger picture, we'll wrap up here. With this slide is city and metro planning, like as a profession, is one thing it does is it seeks to solve problems within the existing urban framework. These are cities that already exist. They're already built, they're already here. Population growth, population loss, whatever the issue is with that city, urban planning looks to solve those problems that are unique to each city. Now, the other idea of city planning, of urban and metro planning, is about, it's like about creating a utopia. It's having a blank slate. It's like the dreams of those that have bigger visions to restructure human settlement. And you've got another video for this class that looks at one of those dreamers, Ebenezer Howard and his garden cities. So we will stop there and you can go check out the other videos.